Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And as we are in the prime of Hispanic Heritage Month, we are jumping in with a revolutionary who has been a soldier, a writer, an activist, and advocate. We're talking about Dora Maria Tellez. And Tellez has lived a life full of persistence and activism. Tellez was born and lived in Nicaragua most of her life. She was a medical student in Leon when she was recruited by the FSLN, or the Sandinistas National Liberation Front, in the 70s. And not only would she be joining them, but she would soon become Commander Number 2, making her the third in command. Here's a bit from Confidencial.digital. In 1978, at the age of 22, Maria Tellez was designated Comandante Dos and served as third in command during the FSLN's guerrilla assault on Nicaragua's National Palace. She would later become the political military leader of the FSLN's Rigoberto Lopez Perez Western Command, the regional guerrilla division that liberated the city of Leon during the overthrow of the dictatorship of Anastasio Somoza in July of 1979. During the revolutionary government of the 1980s, Tellez, who quit medical school to join the armed struggle, quote, because it was the only option we had left for changing the conditions in Nicaragua.
And from her Wikipedia page, here's some more details about her work during that time. Quote, an increase in government repression and rise of political prisoners being taken prompted Tellez to go underground in 1976. While underground, she did educational work in the mountains. As Commander 2, at age 22, she was third in command in Operation Chanchera on August 22nd, 1978, that occupied the Nicaraguan National Palace in Managua, where the Nicaraguan National Assembly was in session. The revolutionaries captured 1,500 civilian hostages and threatened their lives unless their demands were met. The demands included a prisoner release and a monetary ransom. There was a subsequent release of key Sandinista political prisoners and $1 million ransom payment, which Tellez played a role in negotiating. This event revealed the potential vulnerability of the Somoza regime and helped the FSLN win support from Latin American governments and unite and mobilize diverse factions of the opposition to the regime. Following the operation, thousands of youths and women joined the Sandinista movement. A popular insurrection grew along with the FSLN and contributed to the fall of the Somoza regime on July 19, 1979.
So her persistence in the revolution was inspiring. Not only did she go to train in Cuba and Panama, but she would lead platoons for months against the Nicaraguan National Guard and was able to continually succeed in bringing down the opposing forces. Here's some more from the Wikipedia page about her capturing the city of Leon. Finally, she led the Sandinistas units fighting the enemy's elite forces block by block for 6 consecutive weeks until they captured the city of Leon in June 1979, the first major city to fall to the Sandinistas in the revolution. This was followed by the fall of Managua 2 weeks later and the installation of the Sandinistas' provisional government junta in this city soon after. After their overthrow of the then dictatorship, Tellez was appointed as the Minister of Health, and during her time as minister, Nicaragua was awarded the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations Prize for their work in health progress. During her time, she was able to work alongside with other organizations to advocate for the gay and lesbian rights and reproductive rights for women in the country. And for a while, it seemed Nicaragua was working as a democracy. But then things took a turn. In 1995, Tellez co-founded the Sandinistas Renovation Movement, or MRS, after leaving the FSLN. She left soon after seeing the corruption of the government that began to rise at the time. In 2006, she and the party tried to oppose the past president, Daniel Ortega, who had been a comrade of hers at one time. And in 2008, Tellez started a hunger strike to protest Ortega and his dictatorial policies.
Here's what she told Confidencial about what happened during this time. Quote, those of us who did develop a fairly deep critique are the same people who were early dissidents within the Sandinista front and later left the party to create the MRS, which is now called UNAMOS. And we were focused on 2 issues, developing a democratic society and a commitment to democracy within the party. But this is still a debate that we need to have on a broader scale in Nicaragua. Why have all ideological currents in Nicaragua produced dictatorships? The conservatives, General Tomas Martinez, The Liberals, Jose Santos, Zelaya, or the Somosas, Sandinismo with Daniel Ortega. Every major political current in Nicaragua has produced a dictatorship. Dr. Emilio Alvarez Montalvan once said about our country's political culture, "We Nicaraguans have an essential problem, which is our need to look to a strong man for the solutions to all of our problems and to arbitrate social conflicts. This has meant that we haven't developed democratic habits. We fail to understand that crises and debates are part of democracy, that solutions to social conflict depend on institutional processes of revolution. Instead, what we want is to watch a strong figure who immediately solves and arbitrates those problems. At the end of the day, this leads to dictatorship. But we also have a structural problem that has to do not only with the Sandinista revolution, but with the entire 20th century in Nicaragua."
And in that same interview, she talked about the legacy of her work and the work of the revolutionaries. And she says, "I think the most enduring feature of the revolution is the progress that has been made in terms of citizen organization and participation. By this, I mean the capacities that various social sectors have developed to create the conditions necessary to improve their lives and to organize themselves to assert their rights, which is precisely what the dictatorship and its state of terror has turned against. The Ortega Murillo regime has set out to liquidate all non-governmental organizations, social movements, and media, the most important legacies of the Sandinista revolution." And in 2021, Tellez was arrested by the Ortega government as well as several others, and she was sentenced in 2022 for up to 15 years for her opposition to the presidential elections. So here's some context of what happened from phmovement.com. Quote, "Former socialist revolutionary Daniel Ortega is criticized by former comrades for gradually abandoning the idealistic democratic and socialist values that had motivated the 1979 revolution. Since assuming presidency in 2007, he is said to have implemented increasingly repressive and anti-democratic measures. In 2018, over 300 demonstrators protesting Ortega's policies were shot and killed in the run-up to the Nicaraguan national elections in November 2021. The government of President Daniel Ortega and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo, arrested virtually all opposition candidates and prominent critics of their regime. The UN Human Rights Commission denounced the imprisonments, subsequent elections, and accompanying police violence and other actions as fraudulent and abusive. Ms. Tellez was arrested in June 2021, along with other leaders of the main opposition party. Democratic Renewal Union, known as UNAMOS, the 65-year-old former Minister of Health and parliamentarian, and some 200 others were detained and charged under a new vague sovereignty law for ill-defined acts that, quote, menace sovereignty and independence. In a sham trial where neither she nor her lawyer was permitted to speak, she was found guilty the following February and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. Since that June 2021, she has been detained in El Chipote prison, notorious for its appalling conditions. Basic rights under Nicaraguan law are denied, such as visits from prisoners' children, communication with attorneys, and specifications of the charges of which persons are imprisoned. Multiple reports from a range of sources have pointed out, quote, inhuman conditions, lack of potable water, lack of food, solitary confinement without reading or writing materials, and in permanent darkness. She joined a hunger strike in September 2022 in protest against conditions of isolation and lack of reading and writing materials. Prison conditions have left her pale and emaciated. So this was during a time where people were advocating for her release and just her trial alone being a sham. So during that campaign, it was listing like all the things that was happening, including who was in prison, and then also what they're demanding from the UN and others in order to get her released.
There was an international campaign to have her and several others released from prison, and in 2023, she was released. Here's a bit from thenation.com. Nicaraguan political leader and historian Dora Maria Tellez is free. After 20 months of imprisonment in Managua's brutal El Chipote prison, Tellez, a legendary figure in the Sandinista revolution, jailed since before the country's November 2021 elections, was one of 222 political prisoners who were released by the Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo government on February 9th and immediately sent to Washington, D.C. on a charter flight after the United States agreed to provide asylum to the exiles. The Nation interviewed Tellez after her release, and here's what she told them about being in the U.S. and being freed. Well, what happened was a huge surprise. We were exiled from 1 minute to the next, and then 4 hours later, we were in Washington. A virtually instant transition for a prisoner. There was a feeling of surprise, also of great joy, on the one hand. On the other hand, there was sorrow about being banished from my own land, of being deported, of being stripped of my nationality. But well, that is a bittersweet feeling. Losing the possibility of being free in Nicaragua. Because in reality, we should have the right to be free in Nicaragua, right?
And she continued in the interview talking about the significance of her release. I believe that releasing us, even though we have been banished, marks a turning point in the evolution of the Ortega-Murillo regime. Basically, it is a recognition that the policy of oppression, coercion, persecution, jail, banishment, death, and confiscations has not worked for them. They have released us in order to be able to establish certain lines of communication at the international level because nobody was willing to enter into dialogue with them if we, the political prisoners, were not released beforehand. So there's a very important difference between the moment before and the moment after our release. I believe that in the future, we're going to see changes which will be gradual because the regime is also very afraid, isn't it? The regime fears that if they let up on the repression, there could be an even greater crisis, or they could be demonstrations like there were in April 2018. But well, we are at a turning point, and that is the remarkable thing about this moment.
And as she talked about previously, her time here has been bittersweet. She has been able to reunite with her partner, who was also arrested and detained. In that Nation.com interview, they asked her about the importance of solidarity as well as what it is to be rebellious at a young age versus older. And here's what she said, quote, "We have had a really gigantic outpouring of solidarity, right? A lot of people have prayed for us and are praying now, are giving thanks that we are granted freedom. Many governments demanded our freedom and have also proceeded to offer us asylum and citizenship in the case of Spain and now Argentina. But we have also received other kinds of solidarity, people who came to Washington, who are housing prisoners and supporting prisoners in different ways, who brought clothing because we arrived with practically nothing. That is solidarity."
Right. And about the age difference, I can only speak from my own experience, but let's say that an older person tends to become more accommodating. And basically, I'm happy to not become accommodating, to maintain a confrontation with an illegitimate authority, with an authoritarian model. I like that rebelliousness because I'm happier not bowing at my head at any price and not kneeling in front of the dictatorship at any price. And that for me is very important for myself, not for anyone else but myself, which is what I decide. What I want to continue doing and how much I'm willing to pay for it, because it always has a price. So yeah, there's a lot that's been happening. Nicaragua is still dealing with a dictatorship under Ortega and Murillo. Not really sure, because I'm not going to lie, y'all, I found out that I didn't know how to spell Nicaragua until I started this specific episode, realizing that we don't know what's going everywhere. It's hard to pay attention to everything because we are somewhat isolated and encompassed in our own issues. That sounds similarly like a starting point, whatever, whatnot. Just saying, as we're watching things that are happening around the world and in our own government as well. But it is an amazing tell. The things that she has accomplished, the things that she has done, the things that she's willing to do is incredible and speaks a lot to her, again, persistence and her advocacy and her work in general.
Yes. And that she's been there so long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's amazing. Well, listeners, if you have any more information about this or anything around the world that we should be talking about, please let us know. You can email us at 70momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We have a YouTube page, we have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.